Political upheaval in France. Tonight on Global National. An alliance of left-wing parties block the far right from taking control of Parliament by winning the most seats. With Emmanuel Macron's power still deeply weakened, was it worth the political risk by calling this surprise election? NATO turns 75.
Canada, represented by Mr. Lester B. Pearson, gives massive strength to the treaty.
Can the military alliance survive the possibility of another Trump presidency?
Behind the scenes, there's a great deal of anxiety.
Plus,
the big limitation is just how good is our rocket engine technology.
The conclusion of an experiment to put humans on Mars, and retired astronaut Chris Hadfield's prediction for travel to the red planet.
It's going to happen.
Global National. Reporting tonight, Anthony Robart.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. We begin tonight with a rather surprising result in France's national election. After 2 rounds of voting over the past 2 weekends, a new left-wing coalition appears to have come out on top. After triggering this race last month following an embarrassing showing at the EU elections, Emmanuel Macron has seemingly managed to stave off what was believed to be his biggest challenger. Marine Le Pen and her right-wing populist National Rally Party may have actually fallen to 3rd in the polls, something many had not expected going into today, with some predictions having them win it all. Now, although not final, the result likely leaves France in a state of political turmoil that could take weeks, if not months, to resolve. Redmond Shannon has tonight's top story.
French voters at polling stations for the 3rd Sunday in 4 weeks, but turnout appears to have been high. The far-right National Rally Party won last week's first round of the National Assembly elections and was hoping to win a majority of ridings Sunday. During the week, a leftist alliance of parties and President Emmanuel Macron's centrists agreed to tactically withdraw certain candidates from 3-way runoffs to reduce the far-right's chance of winning. This man said his vote is more against the National Rally rather than for Macron's candidate. This voter said opting for the far-right was not his first choice, but it was better than an alliance that includes the far left. Early estimates after the polls closed suggest no majority, but surprisingly the 4-party leftist alliance is in first place, Macron's group 2nd and the National Rally 3rd. The man who had hoped to lead the far right as Prime Minister is Jordan Bardella. He told supporters the centre-left voting pact has thrown France into the arms of the far left. The Left Alliance leader Jean-Luc Mélenchon said Macron must allow it to lead a government. But non-leftist parties have said they won't work with Mélenchon's hard-left France Unbowed party. According to one analyst, potentially the only workable combination is all parties excluding the far left and far right.
A coalition of the moderates without the extremes. We're not talking about an easy grouping here. These are still people who would struggle to work together.
France's outgoing Prime Minister and Macron ally Gabriel Attal says he will resign on Monday but will carry out his duties as long as is required. Given the lack of any clear majority in the Assembly, it could be weeks or even longer before a new government is formed. Anthony?
That was Global's Europe correspondent Redmond Shannon. Thank you so much, Redmond. In the U.S. tonight, President Joe Biden spent the day campaigning in Pennsylvania, a key swing state. The octogenarian leader poking fun at his age to a church group in Philly, but also insisting he is the only leader who can save American democracy from what he calls the mega Republicans under Donald Trump.
Folks, I know with every fiber of my being, I know I won't look like I'm 40 years old, but I've been around a little bit.
On the Sunday talk shows this morning, Congressman Adam Schiff became one of the more prominent Democrats to speak up, saying that President Biden should listen to the input he's getting about calling it quits. And later in the broadcast, we'll look at how the shifting political picture in the U.S. and Europe is casting uncertainty on this week's NATO summit in Washington. In Texas tonight, officials warning coastal residents to expect power outages and flooding as Hurricane Beryl picks up steam over the Gulf of Mexico and hones in on the Lone Star State. Tonight in Corpus Christi, which is right on the coast, the familiar signs of an impending storm as people boarded up homes and shops and queued at gas stations. The outer bands of the storm already whipping up waves, with the storm expected to make landfall about 160 kilometers south of Houston on Monday. Now, the potentially dangerous heat wave in Western Canada is only going to get worse in the coming days. Environment Canada issuing more heat warnings tonight. Temperatures will soar to 34 degrees in BC's Fraser Valley by Tuesday, even hotter in the BC interior with highs of 39 degrees in Vernon. Now, extreme hot weather days are becoming more common in the West. Take a look at this. Between 1976 and 2005, Vancouver barely had any extreme heat days, defined as 32 degrees Celsius and above. But that number inching higher every year. Now, the change is much more dramatic inland. 50 years ago, there were about 12 extreme hot weather days in BC's Okanagan Valley. Not unheard of, but also not the norm. Now, fast forward, and you can see that extreme heat is going to get baked in to the summer landscape. And with heat, there is often fire. Dan Spector has more on the weather picture tonight, which is especially bad south of the border.
In just 2 days, this wildfire in Santa Barbara County, California has grown to over 50 square kilometers, the famed Neverland Ranch among properties nearby. Firefighters have had zero success getting it under control. It's one of over 20 fires raging in the state, gripped by an extreme heat wave. Multiple blazes are prompting evacuations and threatening homes.
We're going towards the spread of the fire now.
Within 25 minutes, I was home and grabbed personal belongings. Computers, personal documents, a couple of mementos, made sure my family's safe and my pets are out of there.
Tens of millions of U.S. citizens are under an excessive heat warning. Dozens of temperature records have been broken, and officials say hundreds more could fall in the coming days. In Death Valley, California, it was an unprecedented 53 Celsius over the weekend, even higher on the unofficial thermometer outside the visitor center. 8 western states are dealing with temperatures in the 30s and 40s. This Oregon woman sought refuge at a cooling station.
I've already had a heat stroke, and so I don't need to have another one. It's way too hot for anybody.
With global warming, heat waves are certainly becoming more and more frequent, longer lasting, and more intense.
This expert says what's making heat waves harder and harder to endure is the humidity coming from the warming ocean, which keeps temperatures from going down at night.
In a few decades, normal summertime temperatures in a lot of places are going to rival the extreme heat waves of the past. That is a fact.
The National Weather Service is encouraging citizens to take the heat wave seriously, as conditions could be dangerous and deadly. Warnings that should also be heeded in Western Canada as the intense heat creeps north over the coming days. Dan Spector, Global News, Montreal.
Life on Mars. Coming up, the crew of a simulated NASA mission to the Red Planet emerge after more than a year. Retired astronaut Chris Hadfield shares his insight on what this means for the real thing. After more than a year all by themselves, a 4-person crew from NASA is finally back from their excursion on Mars, or rather a simulation of it. Members of the CHAPEA mission team spent 378 days isolated from the outside world, living in a mock version of the Red Planet, as well as a theoretical human outpost established on it. This is all to test the limits of what could possibly become a real human mission to Mars decades from now.
I am so proud and honored to be part of this crew and project, and to be a part of a small incremental part of the work being done here on Earth that will one day enable humans to explore and live on Mars. Thank you so much.
And our next guest knows isolation in space very well. He's a retired Colonel astronaut, Chris Hadfield. Colonel Hadfield, welcome.
Pleased to be talking with you, Anthony.
Well, what are the lessons that NASA and those behind a possible eventual mission to Mars can learn from this incredibly elaborate simulation?
Well, if you're going to go live in a new place, there's a bunch of different things to solve. And Mars is a pretty harsh place to live. And so part of the problem is technological. You know, how do you build the machines that can produce the air and keep everybody alive? How do you grow the food? What do you do if someone gets sick? You know, someone, whatever, has to have their appendix taken out. And then what do you do with the radiation and the weird environment? And how do you keep people psychologically healthy? And eventually, we're going to be having people live on Mars. And so at some point, you got to start addressing all those problems. And for, what was it, 378 days, people were inside a 3D printed habitat, testing all of those things all together. And those lessons learned kind of lay the foundation or the bedrock for how we're going to do it for real when we get there.
All right, so for these individuals, life as they knew it effectively, at least for the past 378 days, no longer. They missed a lot, certainly, but they gained a lot of other things. Describe the challenges, physically and certainly mentally, that would have taken and that they experienced.
Well, they put them in a 3D printed habitat, much like we may end up having on the surface of Mars. Inside it, it had all of the equipment they needed to stay healthy. They had food preparation and food growing. They had exercise equipment, even though Mars is 1/3 gravity. So you don't get all the weightlifting that you get on Earth just by being alive. They had exercise equipment to keep their bodies healthy. They had communications, but of course, Mars is so far away that when you say hello into your phone, it could take many minutes to get to Mars and minutes back. So they lived with that isolation of the time lag with people, and they were running a whole suite of experiments and occasionally going outside into a simulated Martian habitat. So trying to make it as realistic as possible so that the crew actually starts to really believe that they are there. So then the conclusions that you draw, the problems that come up, they're much more credible. It's not just people pretending, but it becomes as good a simulation as you can build. And they'll be writing and cataloging all of their lessons learned for months now to make sure we squeeze every bit of information out of it that we can, building a bigger and bigger book of how it is that people are going to live on Mars.
So in terms of that book, what's the next chapter?
Well, the biggest, hardest chapter is the opening one, and that is, how do you get there? Mars is way further away than most people think. If you get in some of the fastest human spaceships we've ever built, the moon takes about 3 days. Mars takes 6 months. Wow. And imagine, Anthony, if you and I got into a primitive, tiny little ship, like a 4-seat car, and we now had to spend 6 months traveling through a hostile and not largely well-known environment just to get to our destination. That is a real obstacle. And the big limitation is just how good is our rocket engine technology. And right now it's not, jets, or it's not even propeller airplanes, or it's not even steamships. We're somewhere back in the rowboat phase of spaceships, if we're going to cover that length of distance. So I think the first chapter of getting to Mars, there's lots of people working on it, all types of different engines. I think we're going to need a new type of engine to cut the time short enough that then it becomes safer and therefore less expensive, something we can fit into the rest of society as we start to settle somewhere between the Earth, space station, moon, and now Mars.
Colonel Hadfield, we appreciate your time, sir. Thank you. James Cameron's right-hand man, Oscar-winning producer John Landis, has died.
At this point, we're a little bit like an old married couple. We know how to avoid fighting. We know how to divide and conquer and complement each other.
Landis worked closely with Cameron on some of the biggest blockbusters of all time, including Titanic and the 2 Avatar films. He was 63 years old. In a statement, Cameron said, "I have lost a dear friend and my closest collaborator of 31 years. A part of myself has been torn away." Ahead, 9 months to the day after the Hamas attacks in Israel, the pressure Israelis are putting on the Netanyahu government to stop the fighting and get the hostages home. There was mass disruption in parts of Israel today as the families of hostages marked 9 months since the Hamas attacks. Labeled a day of disruption, Israeli protesters blocked highways across the country. They're calling on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to step down and pushing for a ceasefire that could bring back hostages held by Hamas. Hopes for a pause in the fighting are growing again after Hamas appeared to drop its demand that any deal include a complete end to the war. Well, the instability of Europe, a more assertive China, and the prospect of another Donald Trump presidency are lending special importance to this year's annual summit of NATO leaders in Washington. The military alliance, which considers an attack on one of its members an attack on all, is celebrating its 75th anniversary this month. But as David Aiken tells us, the growing gap between Western powers, including Canada, and those on the eastern flank is creating a lot of anxiety about the future of the alliance.
The 75-year-old military alliance has rarely convened a summit where its own future looks so uncertain. While it will be the first summit with its newest member, Sweden, which will bring new and significant military capabilities to the alliance, it will be the last summit for outgoing NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, widely seen as one of the most capable to hold that post. He'll be replaced by the former Prime Minister of the Netherlands, Mark Rutte. Rutte will take over in a week when NATO leaders will have to consider the implications of Europe's rapidly changing politics. Case in point, Sunday's election in France. It boosted the right-wing National Rally Party, whose leader, Marine Le Pen, once said she admires Vladimir Putin. And during the election campaign, she promised to cut French aid to Ukraine. Meanwhile, the leader of NATO member Hungary, Prime Minister Viktor Orban, was in Moscow Friday discussing a path to peace with Putin. Orban's meeting brought quick warnings from European leaders about appeasement. A new government in the UK, though, seeks to enhance European security while recommitting it to NATO.
It is for me to be absolutely clear that the first duty of my government is security and defence, to make clear our unshakable support of NATO.
But the summit is sure to center on its host, U.S. President Joe Biden, who may see the gathering as a stage to alleviate concerns about his health.
It is important for the American electorate to know whether Biden is in good shape.
Hello, everybody.
But NATO partners will also be concerned about the host country because of the possibility of the return of Donald Trump.
I think that right across the alliance, right across NATO members, including Ukraine, there is hope, if not prayer, for a second Biden term, because Biden did reinvigorate the Atlantic Alliance.
NATO's leaders, including Canada's Justin Trudeau, will surely be asked, if Trump does win in November, will that mark the beginning of the end of this historic alliance? David Aiken, Global News, Ottawa.
Next, shattering the glass ceiling, the women taking on major roles in professional sports.
It's been a great day. It's been exciting. I'm just kind of taking it all in.
Saskatchewan's own Jessica Campbell made NHL history this week after the Seattle Kraken hired her to be the league's first ever full-time female assistant coach. Now, she's worked in player development for years and was an assistant for the Kraken's minor league team, the Coachella Valley Firebirds, who made the AHL finals 2 years in a row.
I think it's really important to recognize just how it's going to hopefully transform the landscape and allow different people and different organizations believe it even if you don't see it, because it is possible, and I hope that this has proved that it's possible.
Before coaching, Campbell played 4 years of college hockey and went on to play professionally in both Canada and Sweden. And barriers also being broken in the Canadian Football League this year through a special initiative aimed at getting women involved on the sidelines. Global's Jay Janauer brings us the story of one woman already making an impact on one of the league's best teams.
I'm just blessed to be with this team because I have never felt uncomfortable or like I didn't have a place here.
Here would be inside the BC Lions locker room, the team's inner sanctum where few women have ever called it their workplace. Lions equipment assistant Jay Starecki is believed to be the first female employed by a CFL team on the equipment side of things. in a league and sport where testosterone is bursting out of the shoulder pads.
Every single moment since I've been around this organization, there's always been a gentleman that extends their hand and introduces themselves to me and says they're happy that I'm here. They understand the value that, hey, maybe what we're missing, you can fill in those gaps, which I have always appreciated.
The wheels of Jay's football employment were put in motion last year when she joined the Lions as part of the CFL's Women in Football Internship Program. So when a position became available in BC this year, her resume easily split the middle of the uprights, regardless of her gender.
That's an old school thinking where females can't be in the locker room and can't do jobs that are historically male. And that's a testament to the Canadian Football League and that program that we're able to not only bring these young ladies on, but find them to put them in positions that they would never have been able to even strive for in the past.
Jay's had her hands on the inner locker room goings-on of a football team well before her current CFL gig. As a kinesiology student at the University of Saskatchewan, she spent the better part of 5 years doing the exact same job.
You know, growing up, you didn't see a lot of females in those kind of sports, right? So I grew up around hockey, I grew up around football, but on the sideline and playing, you never saw women either coaching or on the sideline. So it was, I understand the importance of highlighting it because, yeah, you want, a 12-year-old to see it at home and go, hey, what is that girl doing down there? And how do I get down there one day if that's what I'm interested in?
This is a young person who plans on leaving her mark for years to come. Jay's ultimate goal is to become a doctor as medical school is on the horizon, where instead of mending uniforms and fixing equipment, she'll be helping heal those who get dinged up on the field of play. Jay Janower, Global Sports.
And that's Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Anthony Robart. Tonight's Your Canada is Elbow Falls near Bragg Creek, Alberta. Of course, we love seeing Your Canada. Please keep emailing your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Thank you so much for watching. Carolyn Jarvis will be at the anchor desk tomorrow. Have a great night.